All right, welcome everybody to another episode of the Inside In Tennis Podcast. Mitch Michals here as part of the Believe Network. A lot of great content on Believe, and a reminder, you can get this podcast on all your platforms, whether it's Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music. We're covering the pro tennis game. A lot of great insight in the weeks to come, and I'm privileged now to be joined by a first-time guest on this show. Really excited to talk to this person. Senior tennis writer for the Dailly Express. She's done a lot of great work for the Dailly Express out in the UK. A rising journalist, I'll say, in the tennis scene of things. Yasmin Syed, welcome to the show, Yasmin. It's exciting to talk tennis with you.
Thank you. It's so exciting to be here. Thank you for the introduction. It was very, very nice.
Well, I think we start with all our first-time guests, especially, the journalist side, because I'm a journalist nerd myself. But how did it all start for you? I know growing up in the UK, spoiler alert for all the listeners and viewers out there, Yasmin is on the younger side of things. So I'm curious, your generation, how you got into the game. Was it playing, being a fan, passed down from your family? How did your love with tennis start?
So I can't play whatsoever, which is why I tell people that I write about it because I
Okay.
can't play. But sort of when I was around 13, 14 years old, my mum liked watching tennis. And so when you want to change the channel when you're 13 or 14, you don't know when the match is going to end. So I kind of had to sit on the sofa waiting for it to end and eventually started actually paying attention and just fell in love with it like that.
Yeah, that's a lot of us that can't really play, but just love to be involved in the sport somehow. I will ask as well too, because like I said, with the generations, were there certain players that jumped off the screen to you at that age? I know I could take a guess at a few of them from where you're from, but who were some of the first players you remember seeing? Okay, this is something special.
Well, obviously, I assume you were going to guess Andy, and the first tournament that I actually watched by being exposed through my mum was Wimbledon in 2013, which is obviously like the absolute perfect thing. If you're a Brit, you've got the narrative going anyway, and then Murray goes and wins it, which just immediately sort of piqued my interest. I remember players that I sort of naturally became a fan of. Obviously, people like Serena, the big three, but I remember Denis Shapovalov's rise in 2017 very well. I became a big fan of Stan Wawrinka after he won the French Open, and on the women's side, I became a massive fan of Alina Svitolina as well.
Yeah, those are some really strong names, and getting to the British side, going back to that for a second, it's funny because your generation knows success a lot more than maybe the past, because you had Andy Murray to kind of go along with. I think you get a couple generations older. That was the first guy for a while. There had been players that had knocked through, and I think that's a lesson for tennis, right? That it takes a couple generations to knock on the door, nudge the door, and then the final one will kind of come through. And now, who knows with this next generation? But Murray took the mantle after some great generational players were trying to break through.
Yeah, I would say if you think about Henman and Rosetsky, I guess the people who watched that generation were thinking this is an amazing for a British tennis player to do with, I think they both got to number 4 in the world. There's the old slam semi and final in there. And I think for that time, and it was amazing anyway. And then obviously Andy comes and just is probably one of our greatest sportsmen in the country, no matter what the sport is.
Did you find that, and this is maybe more of a sensitive topic, but with Murray, I know that, and I'm an outsider asking this, but the Scottish side of thing, there was always a little bit of resentment. Now he's like a statesman. He's earned the right to just, be a sir, literally. But was there that resentment coming up, a little bit of a conflict there?
No, I mean, I'm not. My background isn't from the UK anyway. I was born here, but I don't have that anyway. But I remember being sort of 12, 13, and hearing all those conversations, and we'd have family friends come over and be like, I'm not supporting him because he said he doesn't support England in the football. So I remember it, but it was never a contentious point for me.
Well, yeah. It's hey, you know what? Winning solves everything. So he started winning for England, and everybody
Yeah.
liked him. In that same vein, though, Yasmin, how did the journalist career start? Was it, or I guess, when did it start? Were you a young girl that wanted to just be a journalist? You set your goal on that? Did you organically discover it? How did you start your path towards writing professionally?
So I applied for journalism at university off the basis that I wanted to do a sort of MTV music presenting sort of thing, which obviously is not what I'm
Yeah.
doing now. But obviously this kind of coincided with when I really got into tennis, and by the time I was following the tour week in, week out, year round, I was now doing my journalism degree. So I just kind of put two and two together and thought this is what I care about more and kind of would rather tell the stories of these players and follow the tour. And so I ended up using the qualification to go down the tennis path.
And what was that first professional gig like? What was it, and what was that experience like when you're kind of getting to the big time and covering the pro game you watched as a kid?
So the job I have now is the first full-time job I've done in tennis, but I remember I was 20 years old and it was the summer between my second year of uni and my final year. And I actually live near the Eastbourne tournament, the ATP 250, and now the WTA is also a 250, but used to be a 500. And I contacted a local newspaper and said, I really like tennis. I want to write stories for you. And they had already hired journalism interns for the tournament, but because I wrote them a story anyway, they went, here you go, have a press pass. You don't even have to do any work for us. You can just be accredited on site and just go kind of see what the industry is like, which was obviously great being 20 and just running around with this accreditation. And I did manage to get some uni work out of it as well. So yeah, when I think about that now, I don't know how I did it.
That's a lot of us just finding a way in and then looking back, like how'd that path even work? Was that a tournament where you first got to speak to some players, and what was it like actually interviewing players or getting the chance to interact with the pros?
Yeah, so this was actually the summer when Andy had had his hip resurfacing and he just won Queens, and then he came to Eastbourne in the doubles, obviously, and then came to Eastbourne. So I was doing these Andy Murray press conferences and it was kind of being thrown in on the deep end. But I remember even having one-to-one interviews with players like Kiki Burtons, and it was just I can't, it's funny because I look back on it and I think, how did I manage to do that professionally? But I did
Yeah.
enough. I guess in my mind, I was thinking I have a uni assignment to do for my final year. This was my one chance to get a big name on it. So
Yeah, you just kind of like black out, right? Like you put your head down, you do it, and then a day or
yeah,
two later, you're like, how did that even? I don't even remember it. I got it done though. Yeah, I remember that. That was that Queens Club was Lopez and Murray doubles.
yeah,
Yeah, I think Lopez won the singles. That was a wild event.
yes.
Yeah, so I mean, at this point, and we can segue into the current game, but your role covering the sport now, how locked in would you say you are on the day-to-day happenings? And this is more of a personal, professional question, but is your approach to covering stories looking for bigger stories, mapping stuff out, or are you reacting in real time to maybe some of the events that are taking place on and off the court?
I think it's probably more reactionary. And at the end of the day, I think it is a job. And sometimes you have work put in front of you that you also need to do that is beyond, the own kind of the interviews and the investigations that you're also doing yourself. So I think it's a bit of both. It is mostly reactionary. And in terms of tuning into the tour, it's really difficult, isn't it? Because I think if you're off the clock, you are always on the clock and you always know what's going on. And whether you're on social media and you see something's happening, or you've got the TV on and you're like, well, the tennis is always on, so I may as well put it on. It's very
Yeah.
tough for that balance.
Yeah, time zones. And well, I mean, the good thing about tennis is that there's always tennis, but that's also the bad thing is that you never know if you can map out your schedule for when they're playing. But I did notice on your web profile for the Daily Express that, obviously you focus on the slams, but also British tennis, which makes sense given where you're based. What's the current sense, vibe, or where that British tennis is? Obviously, Andy Murray's retirement, it's some legendary shoes to fill, but Jack Draper hit a career high after his final run in Doha. Raducanu has the Grand Slam. There's some talk of players maybe coming up, but where are you at, and where is the country at in terms of the next generation of British tennis?
I would say probably the wider public that maybe don't follow tennis as much. Obviously, everyone's got an opinion on Emma Raducanu, and I can't imagine how difficult that is, let alone with then having to play week in, week out and manage injuries and stuff like that. But I would say, everyone is probably most aware of Emma and has an opinion on her. In terms of maybe, actually focusing on people that might know their tennis a bit more, there's so much promise in people like Balter, Draper. But even if you think now, I think there's so much more depth, maybe in that group sort of going into the top, like 75 to 200, 250, you've got people like Billy Harris, you've got Jodie Burrage on the women's side coming back. So there's a few new names there, and I think there is definitely more depth, maybe let's say in the top 250 than there used to be.
Yeah, I start with this when we talk about it, is that it's very hard to win majors. Like very few people do it. So I think when you have expectations like that, you're kind of, shooting yourself in the foot off the start. I would say though that, yeah, focusing on that mid-level, the rising tide lifts all boats theory, a real parallel for the American women and how that started. It was just building out the depth, and then eventually a few of them maybe can poke through. Emma already has. We'll see if Draper can. But yeah, if you have enough solid players in that top 100 range and they all start inching up, and then, as you know, it's very competitive. They don't want to see their friends pass them in the rankings.
Yeah, and I think especially, on the British side, and you hear it, especially in grass season, where they've probably got more experience than some of the other players on the grass. You hear it between them, I'm sure, especially with kind of the way maybe like both the boys and the girls will banter on the British side and kind of between them see where they are in the live rankings and try and push each other, which is a really good, healthy thing, I think.
Yeah, it also seems like they don't get. Well, I can just speak from last year on the show. I talked. It was while he was having his crazy run in the Challengers, but Jacob Fernley, and I was like, yeah, it was kind of crazy how you were in college and then you just played Djokovic, Wimbledon, won all these Challengers. But he was like, yeah, it's just it's tennis. Like I just kept playing like that. It seems like there's that mentality of you just go out there and play. You're not really worrying as much about the outside noise. I put Emma in a different basket because that's like an insane level of fame to get at such a young age overnight.
Yeah, with Jacob as well, it's just his rise is ridiculous. And I think British tennis or not, it's not talked about because let's say even here, it's not necessarily a story that's turning the dial. Maybe it will a bit more during Wimbledon. But yeah, I think they're all kind of, there's a good camaraderie at the NTC. And I think a lot of people see each other around. And also, probably the people that are in that 100 to 200 ranking bracket will share staff. So, yeah, I
Yeah.
think they do very much have that, let's just go for it work ethic.
And on the final note on British tennis, I mentioned his name. Jack Draper is into the top 15 for the first time. He's, career high ranking, loses a tough final to Andrey Rublev, who we'll get to in a second. But the maturity with Draper, and we know the star quality on and off the court, the game, the big lefty power, and not being afraid to come to the net. But I think the biggest takeaway, in my opinion, Yasmin, is how his fitness and how he's really done the work in on and off the court to make sure that his body always gives him a chance. I think it's fair to say early in his career that might have been something we could debate and talk about, but he has gotten a lot better, and I think that's a direct reason for why his ranking has improved.
Yeah, and I think especially this week, you can see that he's also making the right decisions with his body. So, he could barely practice in the off season, and then he played all those matches in Australia. He retired from that match. People might have questioned why, but if he didn't, we don't know if he would have been here now having this run in Doha. And even the fact that he's now pulled out of Dubai, he's making some really sensible decisions about his body.
Yeah, I think tennis wise too, there's so much that you can appreciate about his game, but it's such a brutal sport. Even if we take away men's tennis, the best of five side just for now, just a solid 3-set match and some of the like the Berrettini match. Obviously, then you got to follow that up, keep going, and you're into the final. You're playing Rublev, who's not going to go away physically. It's a lot, and these players. We just saw Taylor Fritz say, "I've been playing through an abdominal. I'm going to withdraw." Like you're dealing with a lot, and it's hard to peak at the right time. I think that's the thing that the big three obviously mastered is how can I peak at the right time at the slams at the bigger events.
Yeah, and you can see the fact that, as they've gotten older, they've been selective about their schedule. And a lot of these younger players, and even just anyone that's kind of, from this maybe 30 and under generation, as long as they've been on the tour, it has been relentless. At least when the big three were in their prime, it wasn't this bad. We didn't have 2 week masters and all these kind of, mandatory things. And even Anisimova spoke about that this week, that the back to back from the Doha to Dubai on the women's side is so difficult. So I think all of these players are probably carrying more niggles than ever before and having to make smart decisions about the schedule.
Yeah, I also feel like no matter how good you are, you have to take your lumps. You have to lose. Like you're going to lose the great players, which is why when we get to the women's side, it's probably better to do that earlier. So if you take your lumps at like 16, 17, then you're a season pro later. But yeah, regardless of how good you are, you have to understand there's a level up. But on that same vein, Yasmin, it was Andrei Rublev winning Doha, getting through some tough matches. We mentioned the Demon Hour match last week where he thought he had smooth sailing at 5-2 in the third, ended up going to a tiebreak, winning that. But he wins, and he wins a match that I think a lot of times in the past he would have lost. There's the game, but there's also the mental side with him. He's such a lovable guy on tour, but he has had open struggles mentally with dealing with the pressures of tennis. After he lost that second set, a lot of people were thinking, myself included, oh no, is this gonna happen again? But to his absolute credit, Yasmin, he comes back, he finds a way to dig in, and he wins that third set going away. So for the mental maturity side, full marks to Andrei Rublev and what he was able to accomplish.
Yeah, I think it was a really important week for him. And in terms of everything, in terms of tennis and mentality, probably his best week since maybe Canada last year, maybe even Madrid. But like you mentioned, the Demonor match, you thought it was very colossal in terms of if he won, this was going to be amazing for him. If he lost, might have been a different story. But again, coming back and even against Felix, a really long third setter, and then to do it again against Draper, it just shows you that the fact that he can now do this, 3 matches in a row and he's not losing his head, or there are going to be moments of frustration, but he's got it so much more under control in such a short amount of time.
Yeah, even the racket smash, it's like if you're going to get it out of your system, get it out. It's when it lingers, it's the problem. And yeah, it's not lost on me and a lot of people that this is a year bookend. 12 months ago was when he had the Dubai match where he was defaulted in that match against Bublik. There's a level of uncomfortability when you're watching him because he is so likable that you see, and it's tough to watch any breakdown in tennis, let alone a guy like him. So I've just been impressed with that. The forehand, how aggressive he plays. Also, Yasmin, 5 years in a row in the top 8. I think that's an overlooked part. Like, he's been so consistent. He hasn't had the breakthrough getting to a major semi. But you finished 5 years in the top 8. You're obviously a well-rounded, good player, and it's not a flash in the pan.
Yeah, it's funny the way, like when you think about the way the rankings work, because there have been times, maybe even in the last few months until this result, where you think, how is he still in the top 10? But, it's because he has enough of these runs and he is consistent enough, even if he isn't going to the semis of a slam or winning every week, he can keep himself in that top 8. And then it comes out in weeks like Doha.
The world is all about opportunity. And when you don't have players in these draws, whether it be, suspension, injury, rest, this is your chance to get those ranking points. Jack Draper took advantage of it, getting to a final. Rublev's going to keep playing. He's not somebody that likes to take time off either. So he's going into Dubai and he feels very good about his chances there. So we'll see. But yeah, that event in Doha really did open up some things because you had Draper's run to the final, Rublev winning it. You also had Felix and Yuri Lehechka getting the semis. So there were some players there that really took advantage of it. And on the Felix front, it was good to see him back in the mix. Still just 24, 25 this year. Still a lot of potential. Has to just stay healthy and get back on track. But I think he could get there.
Yeah, I think with Felix, it's a case of so many of these guys, even a Rublev and a Tsitsipas, they were so young when everyone said they were going to be the next big thing, and then they kind of got discarded for the Alcarazes and the Sinners. So it's nice to see someone like Felix is now kind of steadily there when he's now, as you said, kind of getting to mid-20s of his age.
So we got more with Yasmin Syed here on the Inside In Tennis podcast, talking about all the action on the court in the Middle East. We're gearing up for the Sunshine Double, Golden Swing action as well. Great time to be a tennis fan. On the women's front, it's funny, they do the crisscross Dubai and Doha. I just feel like those airports are just like tennis players in and out nonstop this time of year. Everyone's catching flights, but Mirra Andreeva wins the biggest title of her career, wins Dubai, wins it going away in the final over Clara Tauson, another young, solid player. But Andreeva going through Iga and then Rybakina to win before she got to the final. We've talked about her a lot, Yasmin. Andreeva is the next big thing in women's tennis, and at just 17 years of age, into the top 10. Feels like this was a big breakthrough and a moment where we're going to be looking back saying that was the first of several big titles for this young lady.
Yeah, definitely. We're going to be remembering this as kind of, yes, the first of many. It's just the thing that's so funny with Andreeva is, and it was a bit like this with Goff, obviously on a different scale. She's only 17, but she's been around for a couple of years. So she's breaking all these records, but you think, hang on, she has been in these draws for a couple of years. But
Yeah.
that's, it's a testament to how good she is, the fact that she was getting into these draws when she was 15. And that's helped her to get to this point now. She's got that 2 years of experience under her belt, and it just makes her play with so much maturity, both with her game but also mentally.
I want to say flabbergasted, but I'm so impressed by her power and strength at this age. Like, this is a real this is a real power player, and the backhand, especially on the rise, is just phenomenal to watch. She's playing smarter tennis. I think Conchita Martinez, obviously maturity on the court, that's part of it too. But yeah, as I was saying too, she took her lumps early. She was able to withstand some tougher losses, made the major semi last year, and is handling success. I think you can also talk to Yasmin. The star quality is kind of there as well, whether it's talking about how, dad just manages the money, hope I get some, and then thanking herself in her trophy presentation was a nice touch as well.
Yeah, I thought both of those things were amazing. Everyone's been very interested in her story since sort of Madrid, French Open, Wimbledon a couple of years ago, but I just think she's handled it so well. And obviously it's helped that she's had a big rise, but then it's been quite steady, so it's not been a huge thing. But she's got great people around her, her family, Conchita, and you can tell that she's not kind of bothered about the money, the external noise. But yeah, she's definitely someone that she's just great for the game, isn't she?
Yeah, she certainly is. And I thought, it was a great run by Tauson, obviously beating Sabalenka. Tougher matchup for her, though. This is just, you're going up against another big hitter. I think it was tough for her to match some of the pace consistently. But it is nice to see some of these young players on the women's side break through. And that's how it should be, where we have our, whatever you want to call it, top players, big three, big four, whatever you have it with Sabalenka, Iga, Coco. Rublev has been in there. But there's some younger players now that are going to start pressing and coming forward. And Mirra at 9, like it seems like a much higher ranking will be coming in the future.
Yeah, it's amazing that she's already at 9 in the world, and it's she can keep going up because she can make up on her points and stuff. Obviously, she has deep runs, but she's got that ability. This could be a springboard for her to go deep in more tournaments, and there's no telling where she'll be, even in just a few months, let alone a few years.
Yeah, I don't see a weak surface either. I mean, clay, she's proven she can do it. Also, I mean, grass is a tough one because there's just not that many tournaments. So tough to say to someone British, but yeah, I agree too. I wish there was more grass events. So I feel like that's something where it all comes together quickly. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot to like about this player. It was an interesting couple weeks there in the Middle East on the women's game because the top players, Yasmin, they weren't able to find their form. And I was going to ask you, it's general. I know it's case by case, but do you think that was lack of motivation, maybe fatigue from Australia? Why do you think the very top players, the Igas, the Sabalenkas, the Cocos, weren't able to find their footing in this Middle East swing?
I think it's a bit of everything you said, where, Sabalenka's not traditionally done well here because she always does well in Oz. And I guess for someone like her, you would rather, well, for everyone, you'd rather go deep in Australia. But for someone like her, I think she even said she was kind of using these tournaments as a practice for the Sunshine Double. And, we mentioned earlier how relentless the schedule is. These players will get penalised if they don't play these events. That almost ruined the sort of world number one battle at the end of last year on the WTA side. So I just think, these top players are the ones going deep in Oz. They're then going to come here as sort of having to play whether or not they want to, or they're going to face penalties. And so I think a lot of it is that, especially for someone like Swiatek, where, she said she'd never done that well in Australia, and then that means it affected her preparation for here. So yeah, I think it is a bit of the fatigue, but also some of them probably just aren't prioritizing it compared to the rest of the calendar.
Yeah, it's tough. And I would say, too, maybe the American players, like you put a lot of stake in Indian Wells, Miami, wanting to do well there. So it's tough. Sabalenka had that tough loss against Keys. I think it's going to take, regardless of whether you're a season champion or not, there's going to be a little bit of a reset needed. And yeah, lost to good players, too. Alexandrova, Tauson played well. So we'll see. The other tournament this week, Yasmin, was the Rio Open, Sunshine Double, or Golden Swing, rather. But where are you at with the Golden Swing? Because I think it's great to have this place in time. I hope we get to keep it, that there's this moment, this little blip on the calendar where you have a different type of environment. Those South American crowds really give the game life that I think is needed.
I love it. I think it's amazing. I'm also really hoping that, obviously, with the rise of someone like João Fonseca, the fact that he gets to play at home and there's going to be a lot of hype there, and they're going to be able to sell even more tickets than they already do. Hopefully, that will keep this part of the calendar alive, because I just think there's nothing else like it. And you can see that they're kind of, there's a push for the Middle East on the ATP side. They're making Doha, it's now a 500. There's been years of talk about when they're going to have a Saudi Masters, if and when that happens. But you can't recreate something like the Golden Swing and the fans and the interest. And you can see it in the way that we have these upsets like Komisarna against Zverev. These local players really thrive in that environment, and they deserve to have that chance as well on the calendar.
Kamasanya has like a better record against the top 10 than like outside. It's crazy.
He's got a handful of wins, and they're like Rublev, Zverev, and Burr.
Just nuts. Yeah, and Fonseca, I know he didn't go well. It was tough to back up the first title and go home. But yeah, if you want to know where on the outside, where the tennis world and the sports world is with Fonseca, they lit up the Christ the Redeemer statue in colors to honor him. There is a star in the making coming, and it's going to be, again, I temper expectations. Take some years to really get some season losses in there. But, it's the Rocket strapped to him. There's very little that I think will get in his way from being a major player in this game for a long time.
Yeah, you can see it. You remember sort of the rise of Carlos, the rise of Yannick. You remember the way they used to be spoken about, even sort of an Auger Aliassime when he was making waves on the Challenger Tour. And you have a feeling when someone is something special and it's not just a sort of, oh, they might be really good. And, I don't want to say he's going to be the best thing in the world and then it doesn't happen because, expectations, injuries, all these things happen. But you can see that there is something special there.
Well, the champion of that event was Sebastian Baez, beating the Frenchman Mueller to win Rio, defend that title from last year. 7 ATP titles, Yasmin. That's a pretty high number. Very impressive that he's able to rack up wins. Does a lot of it, winning on the clay obviously helps with his game, but and not to say, as a shorter and a smaller in stature, it's even more impressive to me. 7 titles is a number a lot of players don't have on tour.
Yeah, I think you're right. You kind of look up different players and you see how many titles they have, and you're a bit like, sometimes it's not what you expect at all. But for him, I think he's also got now, isn't it, the most clay wins since 2022, which is just the consistency there is amazing. And again, I think this is why things like the Golden Swing are so important, because players like that deserve the opportunity to play at home, to play on a surface that's better for them. And I know people might talk about all clay court specialists, but we play a large majority of the calendar on hard. So these players do deserve to get, more depth on when they play these surfaces more often.
Yeah, and if they switch it too hard, I mean, I saw the percentages already. So much of the tour is hard courts, so it's nice to have some variety. Again, maybe more grass would be good as well too. But yeah, and the last thing on that too, it's always nice to see the trophy presenter was Juan Martin Del Potro giving it to his fellow Argentine. So good to see Del Potro still being involved in the game.
Definitely. I mean, he's just one of the most likable players on and off the court, from the locker room, from the fans. I don't think he divides anyone. I think you could be the most die-hard Djokovic fan versus the most die-hard Nadal fan, and you probably have in common that you think he's just great.
Yeah, yeah, really good approval rating. A lot of tributes to when he retired. Those are the two things that kind of measure. Well, we segue on because the men are still in the Middle East. The Dubai event really starting today as we record this. And one of the matches I just highlighted that was complete was Tsitsipas defeated Sonego. A couple tight sets there, but Tsitsipas wins. Which, first of all, another thing I mentioned in last week's show, Yasmin, but he's another player that's switching up his racket, was using the blacked out frame, talked about it, adjusting. This could be the new normal. Like it would have been foreign. Andrea Pekovic told me like it was foreign when she played just a few years ago. But now players are making the racket change to adjust the court speeds and the ball differences.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's all these injuries and there's all these changing balls, so they need to try something. And, it's not, especially for someone like him, who I wouldn't necessarily say he's stalled, but there have been times where he takes a few steps forward and then takes a few back. It's completely worth trying. I think the fact that everyone can see what it did for Madison Keys, why would you not give it a go? Because the worst case is you don't like it and you go back to your original racket.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, everybody just wants to find a crack the code to the issues with the injuries, the court speed, and the tennis ball thing, which will not be changing given contracts of how these tournaments work. So, yeah, good on him at work today. He was open about it, which I think is good. And I hope he finds some consistency because he's been talked about a lot. Obviously, when you have success early and it doesn't follow up, that's going to happen. But the consistency of just staying on court and finding results, that's what he's been chasing. And last week's loss against Medjedovic was a brutal one to take. So hopefully this could be the reset button he needs heading into the Sunshine Double.
Yeah, I also think to be able to win a match like today, because, I was literally sat watching it a couple of hours ago and we were saying, yeah, I think he could lose to Sonego here, because also Sonego is a great player and Tsitsipas is struggling. So to bounce back that quickly from a loss like last week in Doha, on top of everything else that's going on, I think is a massive positive, even just mentally for him.
And I will say, too, for Medjedovic, gutsy win last week, like what he can do, next gen champion, of course. Maybe just cut the slide on hard court out or just minimize it, because that was twice. And the second one hurt him, but he did it a couple times in a row where he almost goes full split. I know Novak Djokovic, Serbian guy, does it a lot, but maybe just build up to that.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it's definitely, they see Djokovic do it and they think, oh, maybe I can do it. And, he's probably, I don't know how often he trains locally in the tennis centres with them. It'll be often enough. And they probably see him and think, well, why not? It worked for him. He's got 24 slams. But just need to be careful because watching the video, whether or not you watch tennis, if that comes up on your TikTok, you can feel it.
Yeah, that hurt me a little bit too, and I was just watching it. That said, looking at the men's Dubai draw, we just looking at some of the seeds and the players in it. You've got Rublev trying to make it a back-to-back. Alex de Minaur is another one that is firmly in the mix. We mentioned no Jack Draper, some of the big names not out. Also, I would throw in a guy like Matteo Berrettini. He's got a big match against Monfils, but other players maybe you're looking at, or of the list I mentioned, that could do well here.
I think Demonor's an interesting one when everyone sort of started losing last week in Doha, and to be honest, before they even did, because people like Carlos with his consistency and patience is always a question mark, and Novak with the injuries a question mark. Demonor probably I would have circled as my consistent favourite last week, and obviously that didn't happen. That match ended up being what it was, but he's just so incredibly consistent now, and I really can't look past him in a lot of draws because very few players can beat him, right? Before last week, I think this year was just Alcaraz and Sinner. So I'm very intrigued to see what he does, especially losing a match like that, how he bounces back.
Yeah, that's a big thing for him because last year, I mean, really the last couple of years have been great. He's been building up, so hasn't been as many tough losses. How does he handle a loss, a tougher loss for a change? He's kind of like an honorary Brit, though, right? When you think about it.
Yeah, I mean, like it always happens in the reverse, right? So when
Yeah.
he's here in the grass season, he's the honorary Brit, and when Katie plays at the Australian Open, she is
Yeah.
the honorary Aussie. But I think it's great, It also brings, a lot more interest to tennis because people care about these stories of like who's dating who, don't they?
Yeah. He's they said they wanted to play maybe mixed doubles together at the US Open, the new format. So I hope if they do it works out. I hope it doesn't go the other direction because there
Yeah,
could
I
be some
think a
pressure on
lot
that.
of the couples are going to end up playing that one, aren't they? Because it's just going to be
Yeah.
so easy for them. It's 2 days and it's a bit of
Mhm.
fun and a lot of money. So.
Yeah, and I don't. It's either going to age great or like milk because I do think that Berrettini Monfils could go either way. Monfils is just so like what he did in Australia was special. But yeah, I was saying it last year. I'm buying the Berrettini rebuild. I think he's got a lot of game left and still gives players problems out there. So maybe this could springboard his step up.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the way he played against Novak last week was just some of the best tennis we've seen from him in a long time. But even when he came back last year and he was doing well at all these challenges and he was making a bunch of finals
And
really
Wimbledon,
quickly.
right? Against Sinner. That match was great.
Yeah,
I would have said that in that tournament, that level, he was like a top 10 guy. He just ran into Yannick Sinner in round two.
against anyone else, he gets very, very deep in that draw. So, and he's another one that on all surfaces, he's a great all rounder. So it can happen for him at any point this year. And obviously, a big thing happened for him last week, and it's just about building on that. But you're right. I think he's not done from what he did in sort of 2021.
Yeah, we have a lot to like about Berrettini, and the other men's event this week is Acapulco, going to Mexico for them. It's always a rowdy or a hot crowd there where everyone's just kind of, the energy's brought. And mentioned no Fritz. Could Holger Rune step up? Could Tiafo? There's some players that I think could use a big result. We've seen it in the past, but maybe this is a chance for some of these players that have had success, had top 10 rankings to get back in the mix.
Yeah, I'm interested to see Rune because obviously he wasn't well in Rotterdam and then he kind of carried that over into the Golden Swing and then realized he shouldn't have played so early. So, you know, taking a week out is a very good thing, whether or not it's been long enough. It should be because at the end of the day, it was probably like a flu or something. But I'm intrigued to
Yeah.
see what he's like when he's back.
He's very open, and I'm not really criticizing it. And maybe I'm just thinking about this, like for maybe it's a younger generation, Gen Z athletes. He's open about it. He's like, yeah, I was sick. I had the flu. I shouldn't have played. And on one hand, you're like, oh, okay, is that an excuse? But then you're like, okay, he's telling us what's happening. He's transparent, which as media members, we have to like transparency. So I'm just making an observation that he's a very open athlete.
Yeah, I think he's great, honestly. I think he is doing his own tweets, and I hope nobody else ever does his tweets. I also love it when he knows the order of play before everyone, and he will let you know the night before I'm going to be on court 5, and I'm not happy about it, but I'm going to
Oh,
be on court 5.
Yeah. The quicker the tweet, the more unhappy it seems like he is with where he's positioned on the pecking order. I love that. More here. We're winding down here with Yasmin Syed here on the Inside in Tennis podcast. We are talking about all the events happening in the tennis calendar with the journalist from Dailly Express. There's just so much good stuff to talk about. On the women's side, big event in Merida, Mexico, also a 250, a smaller event in Austin, Texas. But the event in Mexico has some good players that are really trying to step up and make an impact. I was looking at the draw and look at the seeded players, and I just think there's so many players that can make a chance here and make a move. So looking at the women's game, we mentioned the players in the Middle East, but is there anybody on the women's side in Mexico? Vekic, Kostuk's another one that stood out to me. Players that can maybe step up and take advantage. Haddad Maya even for the opportunity that they have.
I think Vekic is a really interesting one because, we see what she did at the Olympics, and she's another one of those that everyone sort of had an eye on her when she was much younger, and she wasn't necessarily touted to be like the biggest Grand Slam champion, multi winner, world number one, but she's someone that I think you always have an eye on in a draw. And when there's opportunity like there is in Mexico this week, it's not a massive event with loads of the top players playing. She is someone that can really make an impact.
Yeah, the top seed Emma Navarro had that tough loss to Sonia Cristea, but has proven that she can handle the elements. It's probably going to be a little humid there, I think it's safe to say. So, can Emma Navarro back up last year's successful run in U.S. Open semis? And then the number two seed in the event's Paula Badosa, who, props to her, kind of called her shot. Like, I believe I'm a top 10 player. She got back there. Now it's time to keep building on that. I think the Spanish players are going to have that extra lift down there too, and I'm excited to see really some big matchups. I mean, you might not have the very top five, top six players in there, but if these seeds progress through the draw, Yasmin, you're going to have some banger quarterfinals, semifinals, and final matchups.
Yeah, and I think that's what's great, especially about the WTA side, is you look at that
Hmm.
lineup and you would want to go see any of those matches at a slam. If you had maybe like a grounds pass and they were on a court four, you would be lining up from 10 a.m. the second they open the gates. And, you mentioned Badosa. I think it's really smart of her to go there this week. And, she's managed to get back in the top 10 after kind of making her mark on that. And this is the right thing to sort of play these events to stay there and
Hmm.
get even higher and get back to where she was.
Yeah, Kostuk's the other one too because she had a run. I think it was the San Diego final, lost to Bolter, goes to Indian Wells, does well there. This is another time where she's very serious about wanting to be one of the best players in the world. And if you're not at that level now, you have to put the work in some of the lesser events, so to speak. So they're the players that I'm looking forward to. Yeah, and then the final couple things I had for you, Yasmin, the rankings coming out. You have your top two in Sabalenka and Iga, but for the first time in over 20 years, Americans are 3, 4, and 5, three in the top five with Golf Pagula and now career high Madison Keys. So Keys joining the mix was really cool to see, and I'm excited when she does hit the court again. What that level is like, career high ranking, now a slam champion.
Yeah, it's a massive shame she couldn't play in Austin because of that top 10 thing.
Yes,
Because,
yes.
I think we all know how we feel about that rule, and
Hmm.
it would have been an absolutely amazing sort of first tournament back. But yeah, I think there's not been, she's a bit, like we mentioned about Del Potro, there's nobody who is not happy for
Yeah.
Maddie, and the amount of outpouring of love she got when she won that Grand Slam. It shows everything. And I think she is someone where it goes two ways when you win a slam, right? You might backpedal and think I'm going to enjoy this, and you might take your foot off the gas, but I think it's really going to give her that motivation that she finally got to do this thing that she didn't know whether or not she could, and I think she'll take it and run with it.
Yeah, I'm excited. It's always that next level. See where we go. There's just so much intrigue about the women's game and the men's game too. But obviously, we're in a good spot on the calendar to see how these stories unfold. Indian Wells coming down the pike. Did want to mention, yeah, it was a weird handling situation with the Venus Williams wild card. Now not playing, said she didn't know about it. She's earned the right to. Obviously, wild cards are set off at the tournament's discretion. I just don't want to see her, have an embarrassing performance on the court. So at 44, not playing a lot, this is probably the right decision. But it seemed like it was a little messy. I think it's safe to say.
Yeah, I don't know what happened there, because when you see the announcement that she's taken the wild card, you think, yeah, that's plausible enough. Last year she played Indian Wells in Miami, and it's at home and it's easy enough for her to get to, though apparently not because she's going to be overseas. But I I have no idea what happened there. I am as intrigued as you and everyone else, and the only thing I can assume is that they offered her one and either assumed, or maybe someone on her team that she hadn't even had a conversation with might have said, yeah, she'll do it. But yeah, that's complete speculation. But yeah, I don't know what happened there. And it obviously must have been a very difficult day at the tournament office yesterday when they had to scramble and say that she wasn't actually going to play.
Yeah, tough one there, but glad she's doing all right in good spirits with the other parts of her life. Lastly, looking at the top of the men's game, the question going into Indian Wells is going to be Novak Djokovic's next move. How do you see his level? The reports that he might not have been fully healthy at the end of Doha, but we'll see where he is and how much he plays. But how does Djokovic manage going forward, preserving his body, but keeping his eye on the prize, which is major titles?
Well, I think the good position for him right now is, obviously we know his big motivation right now is slams and playing for Serbia, and it's probably very hard to get up for a normal ATP event. The good position that he's in is that the next tournament he wins is his 100th title, and he wants that 100th title. So at least now when he goes to a Doha or an Indian Wells, where this time last year he may not have been as motivated, there is an extra push. But it's also a long tournament, and as he said, he's getting injuries more now, and I just think if he starts getting into a battle where the first set takes an hour and he goes a set down, is he going to want to play 2 more hours just for the sake of a round of 16 in Indian Wells?
Yeah, it's fascinating to watch veteran athletes. Obviously, we appreciate their time on the court, but they have to be smarter. They have to pick their spots more. You can't just roll out of bed and play tennis for 5 hours. So, and then, with Sinner not on the court, which we've discussed, but Alcaraz has a chance, obviously loves Indian Wells, has those points to defend from winning the last 2 titles there. Zverev's in the mix to improve his ranking, and how the rest of the tour can just adjust. So I think these next couple months are going to be weird, for lack of a better term, but there's going to be opportunity, and seeing how these players prioritize their schedule and hopefully give us great matches is what it's all about.
Yeah, definitely. I think with the men, obviously, there's more depth than there's been in a very long time. But I think there's a sort of top 15, 20 there that they're all sort of the same names and faces. And any one of them can kind of put their hand up one day and win a Masters and maybe then jump into that sort of top 10, top 8. So I think it will be familiar enough names, but maybe still some newer champions.
We've seen it too at Indian Wells, that springboard title, where it's a player like Fritz or, Badoso back then, where you'd win that title, it could be the springboard to something special. Well, Yasmin Syed, you've been very gracious with your time. We appreciate you coming on the show. Anything you're working on, anything you want to promote, this is, time to tell the listeners and viewers what you got coming down the pike.
Oh my gosh, I'm completely not prepared for this. I mean, the thing I'm going to be working on the most, which we've mentioned, is the Sunshine Double. So because I'll be doing it from a UK time zone, it will, I'll promote that, because when I'm up at night, then it will motivate me.
Okay, yeah, that's a tougher time zone because they play late into the California night on those events. So, but I can't wait to see it. We'll follow along all your work and all your outstanding coverage and really promoting the game, because I think that's kind of what we need at this level, is just more people to kind of discuss it. So Dailly Express, check it out. That's dailyexpress.co.uk. Yasmin Syed doing some tremendous work there. So Yasmin, appreciate you coming on the show. We'll have to do this again. Thanks for your time. It was fun. Thanks for coming on the Inside In Tennis podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'll be very happy to come on whenever you want. It's been great fun.
I'm going to hold you to that, though. Those words are binding. So thank you, Yasmin. Thanks to everybody out there for listening or watching this show. We're on all your podcast platforms. Go to Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, iHeart. Just search the Inside In Tennis podcast, where you can leave a nice rating, a 5-star review, and subscribe to the show. And check out the YouTube videos on my YouTube channel at Mitch Michals as well to see this episode with Yasmin, to see all the tremendous guests talk about the game that they know, that we all love, that game of tennis. So for Yasmin Syed, my name is Mitch Michals. Thank you for watching or listening to the Inside In Tennis podcast. I'll talk to you soon.